All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Can you all hear me, see me? Yeah? All right. Perfect. Give me a second. Well, again, we are at the 6:30 p.m. ET mark, and everybody's going to start trickling in, but I just wanted to get started with some introductions. Again, welcome and thank you for joining us today for this incredible session on design thinking and data-driven innovation. Before we do get started, a little bit about Products by Women. We are an inclusive, diverse global community, really focused on trying to make it like available for women all around the world, access jobs, mentorship, and professional development opportunities. You can learn a little bit more about us on productsbywomen.com. I'm not going to be sharing too much information right here. Also, feel free to kind of reach out to us at info@productsbywomen.com. A couple of housekeeping tips before we do begin. Do feel free to switch on your cameras. We would like to see your lovely faces, but do keep yourself on mute, just so it does not conflict with the session quality. Also, feel free to drop your questions in the chat box. We will try to get to them at the end of the session. Know that the session is recorded and we will be distributing it via our YouTube channel. So stay tuned for that. You can also find all the information on our website again. So yeah, with that, I'd love to kind of pass it to Sarah to take it away from here and share all the amazing stuff that she has prepared for the session.
Thanks, Naimisha, and thank you for having me. Excited to chat with all of you today, and I'll share my screen in a minute, but before I do, just wanted to say hello and especially looking forward to the Q&A at the end, because I really want to know what all of you are working on. We have a nice spread today, so we have people anywhere from early to mid to senior career. That's kind of the projection for today. So hopefully the takeaways will be spread across that spectrum as well. And so my hope is that through the conversation, you'll have something to take away by the end of this. So with that, I'll share my screen in just a moment. All right. So today we're talking about data-driven innovation. And the goal of today is to really dive into design thinking and look at it from a practical lens and think about how can we use the design thinking framework to reduce risk in our new ideas. So as we do product development, especially as we create new concepts, come up with new ideas, and we want to bring them to market, we can often have a hypothesis that something that we want to build is going to solve an important problem. But if we go ahead and build that without testing the hypothesis, it can put us at risk to invest a lot of time and a lot of money in building something that may or may not fly with the customer and may or may not bring the business the profit that's needed to actually offset the cost. So the goal of this is really to introduce you to not only the design thinking framework, but how to actually apply that in a day-to-day product development lens. Today's agenda will be, we did our quick introduction. We'll do the presentation for about half an hour, and then I'll take any questions, and we'll end with a quick outro. So a little about me. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology. I studied that in college because I really wanted to know how people work and why we do the things we do. What's the motivation behind human behavior? And over the last 9 years or so, I've had about 3 different tracks of work. So I spent about 6.5 years as a product manager. I started off at a healthcare tech company called the Shams Group for 2 years. From there, I actually moved to Capital One, working on their home loans web experience and reimagining what the website could look like for Capital One's home loans customers to come visit and possibly get interested in a loan for. And then I worked with Intuit, helping to reimagine their HR technology as well as the processes that they use to develop their employees. So my experience in product management was a lot of hands-on work with the tech teams, but also a lot of immersion with the design team and a lot of early concepting and discovery to really figure out what does our customer need and how are we going to build something that's going to meet an important need for them. So after product management, I spent some time as an entrepreneur over the last 2 years or so. So skipping over the right, I've actually launched an LLC called the Sprint Creative, which is my current consultancy, and I help startups and corporations with their innovation initiatives. And we'll talk a lot more about that today. And just for fun to share with you, I also have another company called Passion Bollywood, where I design wedding dances for Indian weddings. So, the entrepreneurship side has really helped me to apply some of these design thinking principles that I learned as a product manager and see how to use them in a real world setting where I can experiment my way quickly into a product and bring it to market without spending too long putting precious resources in something that I might want to build that I might not have tested with the customer yet. So entrepreneurship's actually been a really great exercise for me in design thinking. And currently, as a UX strategist and consultant, under the Sprint Creative umbrella, I've worked with PX Venture Studio, which is a studio that attaches itself with bigger corporations, helps them bring new products to life, and also helped Forbes Ignite with one of their innovation workshops, and helped SessionM by Mastercard with coming up with a new loyalty program for a women's retailer. So it's been a nice smorgasbord of different experiences that have really kind of tied back to my love for how human behavior really motivates and creates a market for great products. So a little about the Sprint Creative. I started this company because I'm passionate about using design thinking as a toolkit and adapting it to different scenarios to help with the product development process. So companies I've worked with successfully with this framework have been in e-commerce, fintech, retail, and logistics, to name a few. So we're going to start slowly engaging with some of our content here before we go full speed. I just wanted to talk about a little bit of vocabulary. So for those of you who may not be super familiar with design thinking, it is a 5-step approach to basically using the customer as a centric piece and to discovering new ideas through an experimental approach. So there are 5 steps: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And we'll walk through each of those today and really talk about how it applies when we're working with agile teams in real time. So essentially, design thinking can be thought of as a framework or a toolkit. There's no exact science to using it, but it's actually a bit of an art and a bit of a science put together. Something to note here is it's actually a non-linear process. And what this means is you can jump around to different steps of the process depending on what you want to learn and depending on what you do learn. So the first go around, you'd probably go from empathize all the way till the end. And once you get to test, and let's say you fail, your product fails one of the tests that you put it through, you would actually potentially go back to any of these steps, for example, ideate, and come up with new and different ways to solve the same problem. And then you might move forward into prototyping your new idea and testing it. So you can actually jump around in that way, but you definitely want to do it intentionally, knowing that the process is designed to have one piece of data inform your next steps. So that might sound kind of nebulous right now, but by the time we get to the end of this talk, hopefully it'll make a lot more sense. So finding the sweet spot. According to IDEO, there's this framework that you can find a successful product that's going to win in market when you find the sweet spot between 3 things that are really important. So 1, it needs to be something that customers want. We'll call that desirable. 2, it needs to be feasible by technology. So it needs to be something that your company can build. And in some cases, it may not be technology, but other things that go into building your product. And 3rd, it needs to be viable. It needs to be a business strategy that's going to make you money. So if you find a product that perfectly balances or nicely balances all 3 categories, you found your innovation sweet spot. And the question to ask ourselves here is, well, this is great, but how exactly do we get here? Let's say that I'm a product manager at Blucora, and we want to come up with a new product in the healthcare space. How would I go about finding my new product in this sweet spot? Is there a formula? Is there a method to follow? How do I check for these three things and find just enough information in all three categories to uncover this product that sits in the middle? So that's really what we're going to talk about today, is how to get there. And an important thing to note is that a successful product, from my experience, is not something we design. It's something that we discover. And so it's really about experimentation, testing and learning, coming in with a hypothesis about what we think is going to solve an important problem, and then discovering whether it does, doesn't, or shows us a completely different problem that we should have solved instead. So if there's anything you take away from today, I hope it is the thought that a product that succeeds because you've uncovered important pieces of information about your customer, about what your organization is well positioned to do, and about what's actually possible in the world. And you've been able to find a nice, delicate balance between those three things. So I'll take a quick pause before we dive in. And as all of that sinks in, we'll switch gears a little bit to something a little bit more practical. So we're going to talk about not only how the design thinking process unfolds, but also what kind of questions you should ask along the way as you're walking through this design thinking process, and what might be some important activities that you would do along the way to supplement your research. So today, we were basically talking about discovering a product in that sweet spot. And three key questions I hope you'll walk away with answers to are: how do I test into the sweet spot? What kind of questions do I ask along the way? And is there a formula? Who's this talk for? So today's goal is to really reach strategists, product managers, innovators, and designers. As I mentioned, we had people sign up from all levels. So wherever you are along your journey, and whether you're here or watching the recording, hopefully you'll be able to find moments here where you have a little aha moment and you're able to take something away. Basically the goal is to really be focused around innovating products experimentally. So let's talk about testing into this sweet spot and really focus on how these two frameworks intersect. So as I showed you earlier, there's this framework here on the top left that talks about balancing these three things. And there's the design thinking framework, which is a step-by-step process that can be adapted. And so the question is, how do you find out what is desirable, what's feasible, and what's viable, and at what points do you do so? And that's going to be our focus today. So you'll see here the design thinking process, but I've actually added an extra step, and you'll see why as we walk through it. So we have empathize, define, ideate, but then we also have choose, and then we have prototype and test. So as we walk through this, I'll share with you, what are some key activities, but also the importance of not only coming up with a lot of great ideas in step 3, but also being really strategic and choosing the right idea to move forward with. And that choice balances what's possible with what's best for the business and actually weighs that against what we've already learned about what's desirable for the customer. So as we move through these different steps, we'll actually start with, checking for desirability. Then in step 2, we'll check for what the business thinks is kind of the most strategic problem to solve. And here in the middle, we'll introduce some technological constraints as well as some more business strategy. And at the end, we'll test again for customer desirability, tying us full circle with step 1. And we'll also check for business strategy in terms of building something that'll bring in profit. So let's go ahead and get started. We're basically just going to walk through each step and double click into it. So for Empathize, the goal of Empathize is really to get to know your customer. And what we're checking here is what is a key customer need that we could solve for, and we're learning more about our customers so we can walk in their shoes. Something that's not really talked about very much in the design thinking world is that, at least at this phase of the process, and when it's taught as a process, is how do you actually choose your target customer? So let's say you're solving for shoppers at your clothing store, and you're a clothing store owner and you want to reimagine the experience for customers who visit. Well, if you try to solve for all customers, it might be hard to really solve for any of them. And so there are occasions like that where we learn more about our customer, and sometimes we put them into categories or segments. One way I like to do this is putting them on a 2x2, where I see the difference between a first-time shopper versus a frequent shopper, and an independent shopper who doesn't want any help versus an interactive shopper. And seeing people who fall across some of these quadrants helps me to understand where I might best be able to play and what kind of customer my company might best be able to solve for. And sometimes you can find a lowest common denominator, which means if you solve, for example, for a customer in the top right, you may be able to then scale your product once it works with them. You may be able to scale it out to other types of customers. So when you really understand these different customer types, you're able to make those kinds of judgment calls. Two things to note here are you want to get quantitative and qualitative data to make your decision about what kind of customer you want to go after. So quantitative data could be any numbers, like how many customers fall into each segment. And when you figure that out, you might be able to figure out how big the size of each segment is and what might make the most sense for your business to go after. But you definitely want to also use qualitative data, which is learning about these customer profiles at a high level before you really decide who to go with. So a little more about Empathize. Once you've figured out who your target customer is, you'll of course do some research. So you'll do some primary research which is interviewing your customer. Something that's important here is really to start with a learning plan and make sure you walk into those interviews with maybe 4 or 5 key things that you absolutely want to learn. And that way you're really focused in your conversation, and you're also keeping a high-level view of what's important, what information is important for you to move forward in your process. Secondary research that I really believe in as well is really good to supplement primary research. So that can be research from reliable sources like other studies that have been conducted, online business journals, or other types of recordings of data that can give you some numbers and some larger scale data versus talking to a sample size of maybe 6 people in your empathy interviews. So actually taking secondary and primary research and combining them can give you a really solid data set to pull from when you're trying to understand and solve for your customer. So a few questions you can ask yourself are, where does their journey start with this product? So for example, if you're solving for people who shop at your store, their journey probably didn't start at the store. It probably started when they were having lunch with friends and talking about how they're ready for a new wardrobe because COVID's over or ending. So this might be a time when you really think holistically about what really motivates them and what drives them, so that when you're solving for them, you're going to be able to speak to that. And of course, a big question to ask is, what are their biggest unsolved problems that we could potentially solve for them? Once you've really empathized with your customer and moved on to the define stage, you want to pick an important problem to solve for them. So when you do empathy, you might actually find that there are a lot of problems that you could potentially solve, but maybe not all of them are going to be the best for your business to go after. That might be because your business is on a particular mission and you want to contribute to that mission. It might be because you just don't have the resources or the subject matter expertise to solve certain problems for your customer. So a great way to do this is to journey map and see all of the different problems that your customers might face, and you might be able to then map those with data points. For example, this part of the journey has a lot of pain points around lots of time wasted, 5 hours wasted per week. This part of the journey seems to have less time wasted, so we may not want to really focus here. So really mapping onto your journey your customers' pain points, as well as what kind of business impact you could drive by improving that particular part of the journey. Those are two things that can really help you to pick an important problem to solve for your customer, while also picking a problem that is right in line with what your business can do well and be well positioned to solve for. An important note here is that you want to use your customer benefits that you've defined in this step throughout the process. So here's where, let's say the problem you want to solve is, how might we help shoppers to have a more seamless experience shopping from home, for example. If that's your problem, then your customer benefits might be something like time saved, it could be related to checkout, so maybe less clicks to checkout, recommendations to, easy to find recommendations. I'm just making these up as we go, but basically having some specific measures of how you're going to solve the problem and how you're going to know that you solved the problem is really important here. And these customer benefits we talk about here are going to carry through all the way till the end. So once we've figured out what problem we're going to solve, we ideate around this problem. And this is in the form of all sorts of design thinking workshops, ideation sessions, lots of sticky notes, and sometimes creative sketching. And a great way to do this is to invite a cross-functional team of people. So designers, engineers, subject matter experts, business stakeholders, and often even customers, to make sure that the diversity of solutions you come up with is really strong and you're able to consider all viewpoints. So the key here is just to ask the question, if I had a magic wand and anything was possible and there were no constraints, how would we solve this problem? And the key to take away from this is that co-creation leads to diversity, and this is a very limitless, constraint-free zone. So now that we've gone broad and talked about all the possibilities, we'll narrow down to choose a solution that we want to move forward with. This is a really strategic step because you've really collected a lot of different pieces of information along the way. You've learned what's important to your customer. You've decided what kind of problem you want to solve. And you've also learned a little bit about the business and what kinds of things they're well positioned to build and solve for. So the goal of this step is to choose something that solves a problem well for the customer with a reasonable amount of effort from the business, and also gives your business a long-term advantage. So even though the two check marks we see here are, we're checking for tech feasibility or operational feasibility and business viability, we're also checking for, we're also lining these up against customer impact. So an example of this could be that matrix you see on the lower right, where you're actually measuring effort versus impact, and you're kind of plotting your different ideas along this spectrum. And then you can start by focusing on the easy wins, maybe on the top left, that are high impact and low effort, and then work your way around the board. So a couple of things to note here are that when you have a large set of ideas, you want to start out with some sort of narrowing principles or criteria that you're going to use to make a decision about which ideas make the cut and which ones are left on the cutting room floor. So you want to set these narrowing principles based on perhaps, what's most important to your customer, what your business wants to go after, or a well thought out mix of those two things. And then when you're evaluating your ideas, you're voting based on these narrowing principles, and you're assessing effort that's required to build versus impact to the customer and business. So this might be a time when you bring in your engineers or your operations people to figure out what that effort looks like, bring in your business stakeholders to figure out what impact looks like, and you could do a similar matrix for customer impact, and a similar matrix for business impact on the vertical axis. So once you've kind of narrowed down a solution that you want to go after, you'll prototype this in a very easy, testable, low-effort way. This picture is a pretty good depiction of what that looks like. You know, just it could be a very simple storyboard sketch that your customer walks through, and you just tell them the story and have them interact with it, or have them share their feedback or thoughts with you. It's definitely supposed to be pencil and paper for many reasons. A, because it's more cost effective, but B, because it allows you to not get too married to the idea, but just convey the concept enough to allow the customer to even inform and inspire what you're going to build, and allow them to also feel comfortable with giving you great feedback. So a few things that happen here before you start prototyping. I actually recommend putting a test plan together, which means you want to ask yourself, what are the hypotheses that you want to test through this experiment? You know, you predict that building a particular app for shoppers will make their experience easier by saving them time, bringing discounts to their fingertips, and helping them interact with store associates. So that might be your hypothesis. You might have 3 things you want to test. You might measure that success and failure by using the customer benefits that I just listed. So that's sort of the hypothesis you want to start with. And so your prototype should be something that allows you to measure that, allows you to test that. So the question to ask ourselves here is, how can I design this prototype to really focus in on those key questions and make sure that at the end of my test, I'm able to easily answer them? And the last step here is testing your solution. So the goal of the test phase is to just make sure that when your customers see your prototype, you've really gotten a raw reaction to how they might feel about this potential solution. You want to learn how well your proposed solution is going to solve a problem for them. You'll also kind of get a sense for, was this truly an important problem to solve for them? You'll understand how well you solved the problem. Did you solve it in a way that was delightful and they got really excited about because they've never seen anybody do it that way before? And also you'll learn whether they would actually pay for the product. And this is a really difficult question to answer. It's kind of rare to be able to ask customers in a test, would you pay for this? Sometimes you can, but sometimes you have to find creative ways to learn that. So some ways to do it might be to pose hypothetical situations or scenarios in front of them to see what they'd be willing to give up to have something like this. One thing I've seen done in research is maybe some sort of a trade-offs activity where they have this product versus a lot of different things, and they have to, you know, they have $100 in fake money and they have to sort of spend their money with different products and see how much they really will put their money where their mouth is, so as to speak. And so this is a good exercise in uncovering that if I launch this solution, will people want it? And also, will it be viable as a business strategy, which means will they pay for it? So a couple of key activities in this phase. One is to use the test plan that you made, focus on the learning goals. So when you made this test plan, there were a few things that you wanted to walk away with and know if you solved for. Make sure to use this test plan and really have a bit of a checklist and measure specific data around how well you did or didn't solve for it. So I have a little example of that here, but you definitely want to augment these check marks and X marks with more notes. For example, oh, it may not have saved her $10 per visit, or let's say it saved her $10 per visit, but it, you know, caused her to, you know, have to spend another $1 on this other feature that we've added. So these are important things to note, because even if for some reason one of your hypotheses is proved wrong, you might actually have a really great extra insight that can then inform where you're going to go next. So when you're measuring your customer benefits using this test, you want to have, like I mentioned earlier, some hard numbers that you can target going in and measure coming out. And you'll measure these customer benefits in this test, and then you'll also measure them moving forward as you continue to evolve your product. And the question around, a business viability is really kind of getting a sense for how marketable is this product going to be, and have we really resonated with the heart of the customer and their core needs to be able to sell this in a way that's going to be profitable for the business. So as we walk through these different steps, we've actually come to the end of our 6-step process. So the question that we ask ourselves after we've tested our idea is, do we proceed or pivot? So have we solved the problem effectively? Did we pick the right problem to solve? Is the customer likely to love the product enough to pay for it? And did we deliver value to the customer that we could actually measure? If the answer to these things is a confident yes, then you're probably ready to proceed. And this is a pretty simplified explanation, so take it with a grain of salt, because especially in large teams and large corporations, there's a lot more that goes into it. But in a nutshell, if you were to want to feel confident moving forward, these are a few questions that you definitely want to ask yourself. And if the answer to some of these or all of these is no, go ahead and revisit a previous part of the process and pivot. So I want to spend a quick moment on this, because it's important to think about how do we walk through this process in a way that still stays true to the integrity of the process, but allows us to answer important questions. So let's say we tested a hypothesis in step 6. It didn't quite go as planned. We actually realized that we solved the completely wrong problem. In that case, we might go back to define. Whoop. There we go. We might go back to define and pick a different problem to solve. And then we might ideate around that problem and choose a solution. And then prototype that solution, test it, put it in front of customers, and see what we learned. Now, we might fail again and realize that we solved the right problem, but we didn't pick the best solution to solve it. So we might go back to step 2 and choose a doable and delightful solution, a different solution, maybe strategically or differently. But we might find here that we need a few more ideas before we can really choose a great solution. So we actually might go back to ideate and find creative solutions, and then choose prototype and test. So I think a good rule of, this is definitely much more of an art than a science, but a good rule of thumb is that you can skip back to a step in the process, and once you've found yourself comfortable in that step, you've got the information that you need, you can move forward. Or you can back it up a step, get your information, and then move forward. But the important thing is that at the end of your cycle, or your what I call the sprint, you should always end with testing with customers. So how does this all fit together? Well, you've just walked through this design thinking process, and you have along the way checked for desirability, you've checked for feasibility, and you've checked for viability. And as you've gathered data along each of these 3 points, you've basically learned how you can strike a nice balance between the 3 and deliver a solution that solves an important problem for people, that your organization was well positioned to solve, and that creates a durable competitive advantage for your business moving forward. And when you strike that balance, you have, I believe, a pretty great product to go ahead and start investing in. And as I'm sure most of you in the product world are aware, you want to start with an MVP. So even once you've discovered your ideal product, you want to start by rolling it out in small batches, maybe a little pilot test, and growing that, so that you are measuring customer benefits along the way. And as you learn whether or not you're solving problems for your customer segments, you're making tweaks and evolving the product as it goes forward. So what do we do with all of this? I actually want to take a quick poll of how some of you are feeling. You might be thinking, A, this is great, I can see the benefits, I want to start using it and check it out. Some of you might be thinking, that's cute, but maybe for a startup, I work at a corporation, or maybe for a corporation, I work at a startup. Some of you might just be wondering if you could go grab another cup of coffee. So I'm going to take a little show of hands here to see whether you are A, B, or C. I don't know if, yep, you can raise your hand. So how many of you are in the A bucket? Go ahead and click on the raise hand. Awesome. Okay. And how many of you are in B, not sure how this applies to you specifically? Okay. And how many of you are in C? You can be honest. All right. So we'll go back to sharing here. And basically, if you're feeling a little uncertain around why this applies to your organization, that's a great question. And I can say that a lot of my inspiration actually comes from Google Sprints, which is a 5-day process of experimenting into your product that you want to build as a startup. And 5 days feels like, just the right time for a startup when your time and resources are really limited. But for a corporation, it can feel like not enough time to really learn everything you want to learn. And so the beauty of a sprint like this is that you can make it longer or shorter based on the size of your company and the needs of your product. And I've seen this work at big and small companies, but the secret is being really strategic in how we adapt the process to fit the process that we're walking through. So, design thinking, as I mentioned, is a toolkit, and applying it is really where the magic happens. And if you were in the C bucket, I understand if you wanted more coffee, because coffee is delicious. All right, so key takeaways. If you walk away with anything today, it was definitely the first point I mentioned, which is that a great new product is not designed, is actually discovered. And an experimental approach to building products can save us a lot of time and a lot of money. We definitely want to start with testing a hypothesis or a theory rather than testing a specific solution like an app or a specific piece of software that we think is going to solve a problem. So always start with a hypothesis around what kind of problem you want to solve and how you think it might be solved. It's important to go in with a learning plan. So whether this is earlier in the empathy phase when you're learning who your customer is, or you are in the prototype phase in step 5 where you're step 6 when you're testing and you're wanting to show your customer your prototype, you want to go in with a learning plan so that you're asking the questions that you need and gathering the data that you need in order to make your decisions. And of course, keeping your customer benefits front and center throughout the process. Those are going to be your gauge, your measure for success, so that at each point you know whether you're really solving for what you set out to solve for. And the last takeaway is, if you've worked in a product organization or you're there now, you've probably heard very many people say, what problem are we solving? And this is a great question to ask at any time you feel like you're not sure where things are going and you just want to bring everything back on track. So that actually brings us to the end. I would love to connect with you on LinkedIn. And if you're interested in any work together, and if there's anything I can help with, feel free to reach out at my email address for the Sprint Creative and all things innovation.
Awesome. Sarah, thank you so much for that incredible talk. I do want to welcome everybody to kind of raise their hands, or if you have any questions, please put it in the chat box. We do have a question which has come in from Michelle, which is, could you go through a process with an actual example, if possible, just very quickly, have anything from the past that you've you'd like to share with us?
Absolutely. That's a great question. I'm going to share my screen as I do that, but just a moment. Okay. We'll talk here. So I had a client, actually at a startup, who had been working for a few years on an idea for a fintech application. So he actually wanted to help financial advisors to be able to work more efficiently. And so in the empathy phase, we started off by talking to several advisors and learning a little bit about their process. Something that was important here is that when we talked to subject matter experts and really wanted to learn a little bit about our customers before we went and had one-on-one interviews with them, the subject matter experts told us that there are so many different types of financial advisors. And so we ended up with really dividing them into segments and going after a specific type of advisor who would be more responsive to a tech-savvy product. And that's where we did some of that, gathering some quant data, figuring out how many advisors fall in each segment, and who would be the best fit for this problem that we want to solve. And then we mapped out their journey. We mapped out the journey for our selected type of financial advisor, and we picked an important problem to solve for them. So we picked the problem of basically helping them organize a lot of their documentation. And then, sorry, I'm a little vague. I'm under NDA, so just keeping it vague. But in step 3, we came up with a lot of creative solutions. So we actually brought together the CEO who wanted to launch this new product. We brought in some subject matter experts who knew the industry and who knew the brains of financial advisors really well. We brought a designer and engineer together, and we all just brainstormed a lot of different ways to solve this problem. And then we chose a solution that the engineer recommended in terms of, he basically told us the effort it would take to build this solution. And we weighed that against the customer benefit we could deliver, which is solving for these financial advisors, organizational or efficiency needs. And then we picked also a solution that we knew that the startup owner felt aligned with his business model and where he wanted to go. And then we prototyped that, just some quick, rough storyboarding. We did some sketching and storyboarding to show the customers or the financial advisors what that might look like in their world in real life. And we got their feedback. What we actually learned in the feedback, we learned 2 really important things. We learned that the initial problem we wanted to solve would not work, because we kind of went in solving kind of a 2-part problem, like a part A and B. And the CEO had his money on part A, and he said, I think this is what's really going to be the secret sauce for my product. But when we tested it with customers, they said, I would never trust technology with solving this problem for me. I want a human to do it. And so actually, part A didn't work, and we realized we should not try to solve that problem because people don't trust technology with it. But part B seemed to be a really big pain point for customers. And they thought, wow, if you can solve this for me, you're going to make my life so much easier. This is how much time I spend with my documentation today. And this is what you'd be able to save me if this product was a real thing. So that's how we walked through that process and moved forward we proceeded with building out that application.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
I think Sophia had her hand up. Sophia, do you have a question? Feel free to unmute yourself. Or perhaps it was her hand raised when you asked that question.
Yeah. No problem.
Yeah. Well, I did have another question. While if she wants, she can unmute herself. But my question was, a lot of organizations are still with the mindset that they've not really kind of explored design thinking. I've been in that position where, you're trying to explain the benefits of kind of design thinking, and then, get a buy-in and tell them the pros and cons and the process itself. So how does one kind of build a case, and how do you kind of walk them through, and how do you educate leadership on how and why we should be bringing this framework into the innovation kind of process, or agile frameworks or product development in any organization?
That's a great question, phenomenal question, something I've been thinking about and talking about to various people, and still wanting to collect a lot of perspectives on. So, um, business leaders talk in numbers and data and revenue, right? And that's a very valid way to think, because if there's no revenue, there's no business, then we won't be contributing anything using design thinking, right? So the question is, how do we really appeal to their number one question, which is this going to make me money? And at the end of the day, um, it is possible to pitch design thinking using numbers. So, what we covered today was like, where can you gather data points, right? So walking into a CEO's office to pitch like a new design thinking team or center, you could actually pitch something like, if you have a new idea for an app in the healthcare space, it might take you, $200,000 to build the app. If you walk through an innovation sprint, and you do it in, let's say, a week, you might pay $20,000 to run that sprint. But if you realize it failed with customers, you're saving $180,000. You didn't have to build that app. You could use that to build something different. So that's just a quick illustration. Design thinking feels a little artsy and is a little artsy, but at the end of the day, what I found is if you're actually going to use design thinking to bring something to market, you need numbers behind it.
I love that example. I mean, that makes so much sense when you put it into perspective. But Sarah, talk to me about, I just want to go a bit deeper into this. How can one kind of take this mindset of design thinking and marry it with like agile product development and just kind of lean methodologies of like releasing products and sprints?
Yep. So is your question, how do we organize teams around this?
Yeah, like I mean, let's say I'm like, working on a product. Like, how can I use marry design thinking frameworks to actually kind of embed it as a part of my sprint process?
Right. That's a great question. So the design thinking framework itself is a sprint technically.
Hmm.
So as what we just walked through, right? So if you basically walk through the design thinking process, you've actually just run an agile sprint.
Yeah.
You just haven't done it with real technology yet, right?
Right.
But you've basically run, so you can actually do this 5-step process in a 2-week agile sprint that happens. And this is actually we used to do it at Capital One. So we had, before the developers would get something to build, there was like a 2-week discovery sprint, and then a 2-week design sprint, and then a 2-week maybe testing sprint. And then we might say at the end of that, we go back to discovery because we realized we had a lot of disproved hypotheses. So you actually can bake the sprint process into your 2 weeks timelines. But what you really, really need is you need buy-in from your product manager. You need buy-in from your Scrum, process owners to be able to create a sprint that's centered around this process. And something that helps is to have certain outcomes, right? So let's say you're going to do a 2-week discovery sprint. It's good to be able to say by the end of the sprint, we're going to have assumptions identified, we're going to test these assumptions, and we're going to have clear benefits that we're going to measure. So those outcomes can help you get on the product calendar. But I will say this is a theoretical thing because most organizations I have worked for are already really passionate about design thinking, and that's just how they roll. So bringing it into an organization that doesn't already have that passion and doesn't want to organize their teams around it is a huge challenge that I haven't faced too much of. But I will say that when I worked with the startup I told you about, they had never seen it before. And I just put them all in a room and opened a Miro board and said, let's go. And they were really nervous because Miro takes a lot of time to learn. It's a digital tool. But by the end of the process, they were advocates. They were talking to other people about how everybody needs this thing. So, sometimes just getting leaders into a room and mapping, customer benefit journey and showing them, look, that feature you wanted to build, it falls under this part of the journey, and here's what you're going to solve for your customer. Here's how many hours you're going to save them. Here's how much cost you're going to save them. Here's how much revenue you're going to drive. Just being able to do that double click can really help.
I love that. And I think April just raised her hand. So April, feel free to kind of unmute yourself.
Yeah, so my question is, we are moving into Agile for our hardware products.
Oh, wow.
Slowly applying design thinking, but the step we're getting stuck on is reviewing prototypes with our customers. So we show them a prototype and they're like, yeah, that looks great, but what does it cost? And what's the ROI? And so we're kind of getting stuck there. And a pain point for us is when we talk to the people that use the product, it's end consumers. Yeah. And they're not the people that buy it. They just use it. So there's a middleman in there that doesn't see the value of solving those pain points yet unless we can prove ROI. So we're stuck on the prototyping phase.
Interesting. That's really thank you for asking that. I have a couple of clarifying questions. So who is your, you said your product is for an end consumer, but they don't pay for it, right?
Right. So I'm a product manager for gas dispensers.
Yep.
So
okay.
You would be my end consumer. I talk to you about your pain points, and I try to feed those back through the product.
Yeah.
But it's difficult to get a gas station owner to buy into solving that pain point because it doesn't affect if you go to their station or not, right? And you need to see the ROI first.
Yeah, that's an excellent problem. Great question. I'm going to think for a minute. I know there's a way to move forward here, but that's a really, really tough one. So I see why you're stumped. Is there a way that you could... Okay. What do you think is the benefit of implementing this if it doesn't bring in any revenue for your gas station owner? Like, what is the benefit?
So we think revenue is there, but to prove revenue, we actually need hardware, like something physical to go out there and prove it. And that's where we get stuck because it's hardware, right? The prototyping, like pictures and 3D printing doesn't do anything for us.
You need a physical thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So is the cost exorbitant for you to go get one of these?
Yes.
Okay. Can you maybe take another route and do some sort of financial modeling around what would happen? Because first of all, let me ask you, what's the customer benefit of this thing? Like, why do you think it should be installed, whether it gets revenue or not? Why do you think customers are going to love this?
We have verified through pain points. The customer pain point. We are also very innovative compared to our competitors. So we're doing things that aren't considered yet.
Got it. So this is going to keep you on the cutting edge. But if your product is a gas station, does your business owner care that he is innovative? Is that something he's really passionate about?
They're getting there.
Okay. So you
again, to spend the money, they need to know they're going to make money.
Right. And it's expensive to do a real pilot. Yeah, I think your best bet might be if you have access to an analyst or feel like being an analyst. I think your best bet might be to do some modeling to say, here's what's going to cost, here's how long it'll take you to break even. But if customers, let's say use this thing at a gas station once and it's a different experience for them, you're going to get return customers more often, right? But truly, they do have an excellent point that you do need to be able to prove some revenue before you invest. So I would do some smoothing and some business modeling and get creative around how are your customers. Why would your customers really come back to this particular gas station if they can't feel a difference, right? Like if the benefit is truly that the company wants to be innovative, then appeal to that side of it and show them that nobody else is doing this today. But if you want to really like the heart of innovation is solving for the customer, right? So if your customer pain point is really obvious and you're going to save the customer 10 minutes per gas station visit, or do something that really delights them and makes them loyal, try to illustrate that with some numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Hope that was helpful, April. That's a really tough problem.
Thanks, April. I mean, in the interest of time, we have about 5 minutes left, and I do want to start wrapping things up. But Sarah, thank you so much for this incredible session. We do have a question from Gianna, and we will get to that. But I did want to urge everybody to kind of connect with you. And Sarah, if you want to share that information, just again, like your LinkedIn information, or whether you're on Instagram, any other social channel, how can anybody reach out to you?
Sure, absolutely. I'll just keep that shared as we.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. And I'm also dropping some information about Products by Women. Do kind of check us out. We have a bunch of opportunities from mentorship to speaking engagements to being able to get featured. So yeah, do reach out to us if you have any questions. Send us an email at info@productsbywomen.com. And then that question from Gianna. Gianna, do you just want to unmute yourself and ask the question yourself?
Yeah, sure. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you again, Sarah, and the Products by Women team. This has been a really great session and learned a lot. So my question was kind of around, with all these steps that are really well thought out in the design thinking process, is there one in particular that is often not focused enough that's still really important?
That's a great question. I think one that's, I'll say two things. One is really the choose step. So actually, if you look at the process that I've outlined, if you look at the original design thinking process here, there is no choose step. It just says ideate and prototype. And so design thinking practitioners know that when you're taught design thinking, you know that after you ideate and you come up with a lot of ideas, you should narrow to your winning ideas so that you can prototype one or two solutions. But, or three, just a small handful. But how you choose your solution to prototype is super, super important, because you want to make sure that your choice is based on what is, feasible with technology or operations, like what you can actually do and what's going to be best for your business. So making that choice using data and really looking at, okay, which of these solutions is going to be numerically really make the most sense, and also impact customers and solve the problem really well. So that's just a step to pay good attention to. And then I would also say empathize. Step one is, like I'd mentioned here, there isn't too much talk in the design thinking coaching world about how exactly do you choose who your customers can be and who you'll be empathizing with. So those are two places I would kind of think more seriously about using data to make decisions.
Thank you. Yeah, those are really important. I think definitely choosing your solution can be an important step when you don't want to target multiple and then not do a super good job with any of them. So I think those are two really good points. Thank you.
Sure, great question.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And before we do close out, I did want to take a minute to thank everybody who's come for the session, and also see if there are any other topics that we'd want to double click on at a later point. Feel free to put it in the chat box. I have dropped more information about Products by Women. So yeah, do reach out to us if you have any questions or comments, feedback, anything. And Sarah, do you want to leave us with any closing thoughts before we close the session?
Sure. Well, I'll just say, over the last few years, it's just been a really awesome journey working in the product management innovation space, because I think I just see a lot of potential to solve really important problems for people. So if you're in the product space or you're thinking about becoming a product manager, I can just share from experience that it's just been really rewarding to see that this changes the way people work or live or get healthcare or do normal daily things. So I think all of us in this field really do have a unique and awesome position to give back in some way. So that's all. It's great to meet you all.
Thanks, Sarah. And again, we will be sharing this information with everybody and circulating a recording after the session, perhaps in a few days. And for those of you who couldn't make it, well, you can enjoy the recording and get in touch with Sarah if you have any more additional questions. Cool. Thanks
Thank you
again.
all.
Bye.
Bye.